We are the weirdos, mister.
Welcome back to the Final Ghouls of Horror. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Holly.
And I'm Elle.
We're three people who love horror and are coming at it from different perspectives of who we are, as well as very different levels of experience with the genre, which we're always excited to talk about. And this week we're looking at one of the classics of horror in the Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
Sally, I hear something. Stop! Stop!
This is the movie that is just as real, just as close,
Crazy! You gotta make us stop!
just as terrifying as being there.
The Texas Chain Saw Massacre is directed by Tobe Hooper and written by Kim Henkel. It stars Marilyn Burns, Paul Partain, Edwin Neal, Jim Siedow, Gunnar Hansen. The film was inspired by serial killer Ed Gein, as well as Elmer Wayne Henley. Hooper was also inspired by the graphic news footage that he would see on TV and being lied to by the government, which inspired the opening scrawl. Released on October 11th, 1974, it grossed $30.9 million against a budget of somewhere between 80 to 300,000. It's a little bit sketchy what the exact number is. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was initially banned in several countries, drew massive controversy for its violence, which I think is kind of funny, but we'll get into that. It has since been considered one of the greatest horror films of all time, very influential on the slasher genre, and was selected for preservation in the National Film Library in 2024 for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. I have a couple fun facts about this film. The first is that John Larroquette of Night Court fame did the narration for it. Hooper paid him with a bag of marijuana. The cast did not have fun making this. Gunnar Hansen had to wear his mask and costume up to 16 hours a day in 95 plus degree weather, and they couldn't wash it for fear that it might be damaged or it might change the color of the outfit. Nearly everyone suffered minor injuries. The famous dinner scene took 27 hours to film, and the smell was so bad because of the heat, the real animal carcasses, and formaldehyde that some of the cast members got ill. Edwin Neal said it was the worst time of his life, and that included his time in Vietnam. And my personal favorite fact about this film is that Tobe Hooper wanted and thought he was going to get a PG rating with this thing. And he actually got an X at first and had to resubmit several times to get an R.
God, doing all right on the prediction there.
Yeah, really.
Like, I think in Australia it took like an extra 10 years or something to get released.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Just because our film board is a little bit draconic.
And that's something I think is really interesting in terms of, and we'll get into that a little bit, but it was banned in the UK, it was banned in Australia, it was banned in Sweden, it was banned in a number of South American countries. And yeah, that's kind of funny to me for a lot of reasons. But you guys, what is your history and or familiarity with this film? Like, when did it come into your consciousness, and how familiar are you with it? Holly, how about you?
So going into it, I had, I think, a different idea of what it was. The only things I really knew was when I was like, I think a kid, in the movie theaters, they were like, I guess, re-releasing it or something. And so there was a trailer, and it didn't show a lot, but it just kept saying based on a true story. And so, like, all the other kids in my school, it basically became like an urban legend and they would tell stories about how like it was a true story, and like hundreds of people were actually killed and found in the woods. And so it kind of was just more of an urban legend to me. And going into it, I thought a lot more people were going to die.
Yeah, no, legit. Elle, what about you? What's your history with Texas Chainsaw?
So most of my interaction with this, even as a franchise, is from references and like pop culture parodies and pastiches, so to speak. So it's the I am putting this thing that I know into this other thing. Aren't I a clever director? But funnily enough, I was just recently reading a manga series of Petals of Reincarnation, where the premise is basically everyone who doesn't have talent in the world has some link in their ancestor, like their past lives, where they were someone famous. And one of the very early antagonists was Ed Gein, his reincarnation,
Okay.
and their superpower was just being able to destroy people. And his final words is, "No, I didn't get to turn enough people into lampshades." So that is my entire pre this podcast connection with this movie.
Okay. So in my case, I didn't see it. I was aware of it because it's such a pop culture phenomenon. I was aware of it from, I would say, I mean, how can you really not be? Like, I knew probably from a kid, I would say. I didn't see it until probably my late 20s. I actually saw, funny enough, I saw the Platinum Dunes remake first with Jessica Biel. And by the way, I should say I think that one is quite good. It's very different in tone, but it's still really well made, and it's easily the best Platinum Dunes remake. Not that that's a very high bar. But anyways, I after I saw the remake, I had to go back and rent the original, and since then I've seen pretty much all the films. I don't know that I've seen 3 from the original chronology, but I've seen 2. I've seen 4, which is the one with Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, and then I've seen all the remake sequels, the reboot, and such. So fairly familiar. So let's get into a little bit what this film is actually about. Content warning for people: there is implied cannibalism, animal carcasses, lots and lots of animal carcasses. But Elle, tell us what this film is about.
It is about an hour and a half too long, for starters. But no, so the plot as it exists, we open with the title crawl. It's just, and I'll just do it from the top. The film in which you're about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell a group of 5 youths, in particular Sally Hardesty and her invalid brother Franklin. It is all the more tragic in that they were young, but had they lived very, very long lives, they could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of that mad and macabre as they were to see that day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare. The events of that day were to lead to the discovery of one of the most bizarre crimes in the annals of American history, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. And we get some feedback from the radio that these places in Texas, like cemeteries, have been desecrated, and some of the graves robbed, disturbed, chopped up, made into sculptures, but not all of them. Which I guess then sets the scene for our main cast, which are five kids in a van, no dog in sight because can't have too much Scooby Doo going on, with the premise that they are going to check on the grandfather's grave of the main character Sally and the wheelchair brother Franklin, the grandfather, just to make sure it's all good.
Mm-hmm.
And after checking in with locals, no, everything's fine. They start having some difficulties with their car in that they don't have enough petrol or gasoline because America. Driving along, they pick up a hitchhiker because you're super trusting in the 70s in America and when you're a teenager. So it's just this one real sketchy guy, like, hops into the car, says it is from around their family work at the local slaughterhouse, and that eventually he gets his hand on a knife and sort of just cuts his hand open, and everyone's grossed out by it because why wouldn't you? Eventually takes a picture of the people. It's like, oh, now you got to pay me for it, and they don't want to because, again, why would you? So he attacks the guy in the wheelchair with a straight razor, and they kick him out of the car and smears blood on it, and they drive off as he sort of goes about his merry little way. They pull up to the local gas station because they kept on driving to go to the grandfather's house, and they just don't have any. They're out. They're quite welcome to stick around until like the tanker gets there to load up more, but other than that, no. So they peace out and go to the abandoned house. Kids being kids, they're like, we want to have a poke around. We want to go to the local swimming hole that you said was here, because the main kids used to go there a little bit when they were younger. So you have two couples and then the fifth wheel, so to speak. The previously unrelated couples, was it Kirk and Pam? I think are the characters' names. They run off to go innocently swimming and not anything else, I'm sure, to find that it's dried up, but they can hear the sound of a generator running. So it's like, oh, well, maybe we can get some gas, like barter with them or whatever. And there's a house off in the distance. Being the noble gentleman that he is, Kirk decides to go first into the house, trying to knock on the door, ask if anyone's home. Takes way too long to do it, and just runs into this giant person wearing a mask of human skin. Again, as you do, I assume, in Texas. Just basically knocks him out and drags him into a room. The girlfriend gets sort of, impatient, tries to go in after him, and ends up mostly copping the same fate, except she gets hooked onto a meat hook and watching as the boyfriend gets cut open with a chainsaw, which is always fun. So then we cut back to our main people, like three of them at this point. The boyfriend of the main character decides to go off and find them, because when you're split up, that's what you do, is you just go one by one. You never take anyone with you. And then night falls because you never get to see this guy again. I believe like he stumbles across the other girlfriend in a freezer and then just gets taken out. Cut back, and it's just the two, and they're like, "Yep, we're going to go in after them." While they're going there, they also find the house with the generator and looking for people. And then all of a sudden, the leather-faced killer jumps out with a chainsaw to cut our wheelchair friend in half. And of course, that leaves our final girl running away, trying to get into the house. All sorts of macabre, scary things in there. And eventually does what you normally do and run up to the attic, where you have no escape. The two corpses up there, they're one male, one female. Scariest thing you've ever seen. Guy in a suit. Runs out of the house, again, just escaping sensibly within an inch of her life, as runs to the gas station. As it turns out, that is a relative of this chainsaw killer that is then trying to tie her up and bring her back to the house. Along the way, as they go, they find that hitchhiker again, because they're all a family. It's like, how could you leave the house with your brother alone? Isn't he going to do something weird? She gets taken to the house and tied up, which brings us to the dinner scene, where it's mostly that they want her for dinner because they got put out of work from the slaughterhouse, and now that's just how they do. They bring Grandpa down from the attic. Turns out he's not actually dead, just almost, because he's too old. Asking Grandpa to, he's the best killer there was. Let's just take to her with a hammer. So you get this very awkward scene of an old guy trying to very feebly bash a woman's brains in with a hammer. And because of that, she gets to escape out onto the road as the two brothers are chasing. They avoid getting run over by a truck, except the hitchhiker fellow gets hit by the truck instead, which then angers our chainsaw friend, who then another truck happens to drive by. Sally jumps in the back, covered in blood, and drives away hysterical as our leather faced friend just goes to town with a chainsaw. And that is the synopsis.
All right, so let's talk about the film. And to start with, this might be a somewhat obvious question or obvious answer, but do we call this a slasher film? I think most people do, and I would say I certainly consider it to be one. But I've seen it described as more of an exploitation film. I've heard it called folk horror. I have, obviously, it's a cannibal film. I would argue it's even a home invasion film of a sort, a reverse home invasion kind of thing. But what do you guys think? Does this fit within the slasher genre?
I think technically it has to, doesn't it? Because on one hand, what else would you really call it? Because nothing else really happens. But on the other, I could see the argument against that because, well, it didn't have a genre before then. Like, if we consider this as the proto slasher, like the primordial ooze of slasher films, it's like, well, they didn't have the word for it,
Right.
so they wouldn't have called it that.
So, interesting little footnote about this. So, most people, I think, if you ask most people what's the first slasher film, actually, I'll get about 5,000 different answers. But the one that most people go to is Black Christmas. There are some proto slashers, like you said, that were before that, Psycho, and one whose name escapes me at the moment, a Peeping Tom from the 60s in the UK. But Black Christmas is the one that people normally go to. This film released on literally the same day as Black Christmas. The difference being Texas Chainsaw released on October 7th, 1974 in Texas, and Black Christmas did so in Canada. So they're kind of both the first slasher. Again, if we're calling it a slasher. But yeah, it just I think it's sort of an interesting debate because it does sort of fit multiple genres, and yet at the same time, it kind of establishes the format in a lot of ways. Holly, what about you?
Like, I don't know what you're talking about because I think this is like the very definition of slasher. It's a guy in a mask with a chainsaw
Yeah,
chopping up people. I mean, that's just that's what I would define as slasher.
I mean, a guy in a mask with a chainsaw is also a gardening documentary.
you're not wrong. I would say, like, to be clear, I do think it's a slasher film. I do think Black Christmas is a pure one, which does kind of earn it slasher status for me because in this one it is, for one thing, I would argue that other than a little very light trespassing, you don't have the traditional, I think one of the signature elements of slashers, which a lot of slashers have diverged from that theme, to be fair, of these monsters are sort of punishing the teens for their bad behavior. We have some implication of some of the traditional bad behavior stuff, but they never get to it.
I mean, maybe that's why he was going for his PG rating.
That kind of, yes, actually. So Tobe Hooper cut down on the language and thought he was making the scenes less violent than I think the film comes off because he was trying to get that PG rating because if it's PG is financially better. But I do think that you're both right. It is very formative slasher stuff. It just kind of gets beat in that first slasher status because Black Christmas is a little bit pure in that form.
Yeah, there's not quite enough of a clean delineation of
Right.
what makes a slasher by more modern standards.
Yep. I
Whereas
think
I
so.
haven't seen Black Christmas either, but I imagine that's that little bit more familiar to people who expect a slasher movie by that title.
Yes. Yeah. Black Christmas is very much a sorority over Christmas, and it's one we need to put on the list for sure.
Mhm.
Maybe for around December. But Black Christmas is a bunch of sorority girls being stalked by a killer over Christmas break. And they are very much your typical slasher film sorority girls. They're mean, they're bitchy, they're drinking, they give their house mother a really, really difficult time. One of our main characters is pregnant, so they've broken that particular sin. It's just a little bit more of a pure what we think of when we think of the genre. Where this one, again, I can see the argument of like, no, this is a little bit more home invasion than a slasher film. Reverse home invasion, but still kind of home invasion. But I do think it qualifies. So getting into to the film itself, we've got essentially with this movie two different groups of characters. We've got the teens versus the family. What do we think of each of the like? Are they well developed enough for what we're looking for here? Do the performances work? Do they inspire what we're looking for? I mean, this is a slasher film. This is a early 70s proto slasher film that was produced on a truly minuscule budget. So we're not going to argue that these are Oscar winning stuff out of thing, but like are they inspiring what we're looking for here in terms of like empathy for the teens and terror for the family?
No, I would not say that. I
Okay.
Part of me wants to argue the fact that there are any characters in this, just because of how my impression of it is how poorly developed they were, but at least by modern sensibilities. Of
Right.
course, like this is me looking what 40, 50, 270 odd years into the past. I don't know time,
Yeah,
but
about 50.
yeah, so it's like I'm looking at it from this perspective where it's like, okay, well, all of them sound like they're coming from that same level.
Mhm.
So there's not really a character to distinguish them between. So how could you say there were characters? Because there's not really.
I'm assuming are you talking about just the teens here or both sides of it?
Both, kind of. I mean, the family gets a little bit better developed just to kind of distinguish them from each other, but they all share that type of off putting kind of nature, I guess,
Okay. Interesting.
where they're basically all the same, but they've gone off in slightly different divergences from this starting point. Whereas for the teens, I think maybe be, just from the nature of the physicality of it, Franklin, the one in the wheelchair,
Mhm.
has some differentiation as a character. The rest of them, it's like, yeah, they could literally be four CGI clones of like the same person, and it wouldn't really make too much of a difference.
Okay. Okay. Holly,
That's at
what do
least
you
my
think?
rating on it. Yeah.
I mean, that's
So
fair.
I think that the kids, I think Sally and Franklin are fairly well developed in my mind.
Mhm.
The other ones, I'm trying to remember all their names. There's Pam and Kirk, and then the other guy. What is the other guy's name?
Jerry.
Is it Jerry?
That's
Is that it?
yes, I think
Okay.
so.
Like I'm
Jerry.
struggling to remember.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is Jerry.
And no, I remember which one he is. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, he is Sally's boyfriend.
they are there to die.
Yes.
Definitely like those three, it's like you're here to be chopped up. There's really no development there other than
No.
they're kind of dumb kids wandering
I mean,
around.
there's a Pam is into astrology and new age shit. And Jerry drives.
Yes,
That
yeah,
that's
Jerry Drive.
development, right?
And Kirk, he's got some nice hair. Um,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I was enjoying the 70s hair, I'm not going to lie.
yeah, like that's um, I think Sally is like I could use a little more development on her end. I think Franklin is pretty well developed.
Mhm.
So on that end, the family, whom I absolutely love, I don't think they need to be overly developed. You get what they're about
Right.
pretty early on, and that they are psychotic and wonderful, and I mean, adopt me now. So I think they're great as is.
Yes.
There definitely could be more development with the kids. At the same time, most of them are just going to get sliced up. So I see that they didn't feel the need to do that.
Right. I would say I'm a little bit more towards Holly towards her side than the else. I do think, look, are they great in terms of character development and backstory? No. God no. But I would argue outside of actually even that, are they any better or worse developed than the kids from Nightmare on Elm Street? I don't think they are. I think they're about on the same. Like we know, obviously Sally and Franklin are your main characters, so to speak. Really, just Sally. Like Franklin gets development and gets to last longer than Pam, Kirk, and Jerry.
Hmm.
But we have just a little bit of backstory why they're here because they were concerned about their grandfather's grave being dug into. Absolute Ed Gein reference there, by the way. But that's kind of all we get. And then, like I said, Pam's into the New Age astrology stuff. I honestly, granted, I watched this about a week ago in preparation for this, but I couldn't tell you the different. Like, if you, I have problems remembering which one is Jerry and which one is Kirk. Other than I can tell you that Kirk dies first, and then Jerry goes out after Pam and Kirk.
Seriously, it's just the hair on Kirk. It's the only way I
Yeah,
remember him.
yeah, no, legit. But I think they're giving us just enough, and the performances for again an $80,000 almost guerrilla film shot in 1974. I think the performances are fairly solid,
Hmm.
even for Pam, Kirk, and Jerry.
So, can I ask a character question that might not even amount to being relevant in any way?
Yeah,
Franklin, was he born paralyzed or become paralyzed?
that is a very good question that they don't answer.
Because
Well, I
that's
assumed he was born paralyzed, but that was just an assumption.
No, they don't say whether he was born that way, but we know that he was paralyzed as a kid because when Pam and Kirk are going down to the
swimming
river,
hole,
they
yeah.
talk about how he probably had to be carried down there.
Unless they don't know either and are just being rude and making assumptions.
That's true, but the way that Kirk says it, it sounds like they are at least aware that he has been
Hmm.
paralyzed for a long time.
But for like the reason for the questioning is for something that is ostensibly such a notable character trait, do we have any characterization for it?
I don't think we do, but I actually kind of like that because, like, in a number of what I would call lesser films, everything and with Franklin, a large portion of what the discussion around Franklin is his disability, but it's not literally everything about his character.
Hmm.
And I
No,
think
of
in a lot
course.
of other films he would be.
I'm thinking more like that is an opportunity for some character building,
Oh, for sure.
where it's like otherwise he is just as bland as everyone else because it's the only real differentiating factor.
He is, I would say, and there has been over the years a lot of what I would call Franklin slander. He is often referred to, and I don't think it is entirely unfair, as the most annoying character in the movie.
Yes, but that also makes him stand out as one of the characters in the movie because he actually does something.
Exactly. I think, but also, like, I don't think it's unfair that he is acting the way that he is acting. It makes sense to me that he is concerned about Sally going out to see what's going on with Kirk and Pam and Jerry and all of that kind of stuff because it's a rational reaction. But I think while there is not a lot to these characters, certainly on the page, I do think that there's enough in the performances, particularly for Sally and Franklin, that we care at least enough to be concerned for them, particularly for Sally, when shit gets real. That's my personal take on it. As far as the family, again, they're not the most well rounded. They're terrifying. I think all of them are off putting in the right way. Like the hitchhiker very much sets a tone for once he gets in and is has that manic energy that is just clashing against the vibe of the teenagers. Leatherface, I think, is an interesting character because sure, he is imposing, he is monstrous, he is terrifying as fuck, but I also think he's sympathetic in a way. There is sort of the way he's treated by his his family. There is a sense of him being the what's the phrase I'm looking for here?
Maternal figure.
A little bit, yeah. Like, okay, there is one of my favorite reads of this film, and specifically getting into the dinner scene is Kim Newman, who is an English film critic, wrote for Film Reference about this movie, and he describes the dinner scene as sort of a parody of sitcom families where the gas station owner officially credited as old man is the father. Leatherface is sort of the housewife who stays home, prepares the dinner, all that kind of stuff, and the hitchhiker is the rebellious teenager. And I think that really works in sort of establishing who these characters are. And I don't think you really need a lot more than that.
I love the idea of Leatherface as the housewife that prepares the dinner.
I mean, but he really is, and later films sort of play into that a little bit more. But like, if you look at it, one of my favorite things to do about this film, look at this movie from Leatherface's perspective. He doesn't go out hunting down kids.
No, they come to him.
Yeah, they come up, they go into his house. I'm pretty sure if they weren't cooking them, I'm pretty sure he would be getting off in Texas for what he's doing. That's self-defense right there.
I I would like to call into account the phrase "getting off" in Texas.
Yes, thank you.
Texas. I think that might be happening either way.
That is fair. He would be found innocent in a court of law in Texas.
Yeah, but it's also Texas.
Okay, you're not wrong there. Hello, Texan people.
You know what you're about.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's be honest.
But yeah, I think one of the other things I do really like about the family, there is this sense of this is playing into, like I said, the things that Tobe Hooper was sort of inspired by. There is a sense in this film that these are people who have been let down by their country and particularly by capitalism. And this is getting into sort of a thematic and political read of the film. But the family, and presumably other people in the community, their whole source of income was a slaughterhouse, and it got shut down because of a more efficient way to do it. There is a decent amount of dialogue that is devoted to this fact. And sure, they're monstrous people, but I think that there's a lot in this film in terms of how, and specifically into the family, in terms of how Hooper sort of saw the way the government in the 70s was passing people like this by. And then you have, these city kids, they come in, they don't know what they've stepped into. I think, frankly, there's a lot of this film. If we assume that the teens are city folk, probably somewhere like Austin or Houston or something like that, I think there's a lot in this film that's still relevant in terms of the whole urban versus rural divide that is probably stronger today than it was in the 70s. And I think it's easy, at least for me, to relate to this film or relating to the characters in this film because we see a lot of that playing out today. So for my part, I do really enjoy the characters, even if they're not like this film was never going to win an Oscar for
No,
best screenplay. Let's put it that way.
I mean, especially back in the 70s coming out, it definitely would not be nominated.
Listen, we are recording this literally just having come off the Oscars, and I will hold my rant for how Demi Moore got fucking robbed last night for Best Actress. I love Mikey Madison. She's amazing. Anura was a great film. I'm just gonna leave that there before I go into a whole rant.
Okay.
I think that like I didn't find the family that threatening or like that sort of scary, mostly because like I grew up with people like that like in my school and
Mm-hmm.
in my day-to-day retail workings and customer service. It's like, yeah, these I just see too many of these people to find them interesting.
That's fair.
I mean, hell, that's what the show is about. It's like different perspectives and
Yeah,
interpretations and
no,
whatnot.
very much so. So that gives me an interesting question. Do you think not with the chainsawing and the murdering and all that, do you find yourself relating to them a little bit more than you do the teens?
I think so, but only because there's more to actually relate to rather than here is a cardboard cutout of person shaped person.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough.
Not like I don't have my fair share of problems in that arena, but yeah.
All right, fair enough. So, moving on from the characters for a moment, one of the things I love about this film is how infamous it is for the controversy around its violence. And I'm curious what you guys think about the violence and how it is depicted in this movie. Because for me, I mean, I'm not going to say that it is. There are people who've talked about how it's practically a bloodless movie, and I don't think that's the case. But even by like 70s like exploitation centers, I don't think there's a ton of violence and gore that you see on screen, to be clear, in it. What do you guys think about how that's depicted? Like, Holly, how did you find the violence and the horror aspects of it?
I mean, there definitely could have been more blood, more gore. Because I thought putting myself into like the 70s mindset of when this came out, because this is when they really started trying new things in film. Because you've got Black Christmas is 70s, right?
Correct.
Okay, you've got Black Christmas, you've got Halloween, which came later in the decade. You Texas Chain Saw Massacre. So, and I believe the original Friday the 13th. That's also 70s,
Correct.
right? Okay.
Yep,
So yeah.
78.
Oh, right. Okay. So this is definitely, we are trying new things, and I think the lack of gore also goes into the I'm trying to get a PG rating on this.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I feel like you don't need the gore with this movie. You clearly see what's going on.
Right.
They're being put on meat hooks, they're being put in freezers, they're carving them up. Like, you know what's going on without all of the gore and blood.
Mm-hmm. There is a Mandela effect that I think a lot of people have with this film because you go out, you look for opinion on this film. There are people who will swear up and down that you see that meat hook go into Pam,
Yeah,
which you don't.
you. So that scene for me, I play a lot of Dead by Daylight. So
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
that was
yeah,
like, yeah. So that was just straight out of Dead by Daylight right there.
very much so.
Once again, I don't need to see it going into her to know what is happening. I hear the noise, I hear her reaction.
Right. And same thing in that same scene, not that scene, but the actually no, in that exact same scene. I think people create in their mind the notion that there's this extremely gory chainsawing of Kirk.
Mhm.
Doesn't happen. If you look at it outside of the concept of the film, like Gunnar Hansen is vaguely waving the chainsaw in the vicinity of where Kurt is physically laying, but the way it's put together, you makes it look a lot more.
Yeah.
El, what about how do you feel about the violence in this?
Similarly to Holly, I think it's let down a little bit by trying to go for that lower rating. It's like
Hmm.
it feels too insulated. It's like yeah, you can draw the conclusions and like theater of the mind what happens, so you don't need all the excessive blood and gore. But I think that it is too padded. Like it's the parents worrying about their kid falling over, so they've triple layered them so thick that the kid can barely move. It's like it goes that too far that it removes that impact, even the implied impact in my mind, because it's like, yeah, swinging the chainsaw down, you don't need to see a fountain of blood, but the movement is too slow to be that impactful. So it's like, well, obviously it came up short.
Fair. I mean, I can see that. Yeah, I mean that's obviously how I started this. There isn't a lot, and I do find that interesting. I do think a lot of the film's reputation, and I think one of the reasons that it was banned is that it's not an explicit film, but I do think it is a brutal and unrelenting film.
It's like Sally throws herself through two windows over the
Yep.
course of the film. It's like there's not enough shattering of glass for that to feel like that has an impact. That feels like it is too protective.
Okay.
Like that's just like maybe I'm being too analytical on it, but
No, that's your perspective and that's your read on it, and I can understand that for sure.
because I'm like you, Jeremy, I'm a wrestling fan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where Holly falls on that
I know
regard.
nothing about wrestling.
But it's like you see someone take the big dive off the top, and it's like, oh, they've landed in the staging and all the lights and everything. It's like, yeah, but they didn't make a sound, so
Right.
there's a nice comfy mat for them to lay on. Even if we can't see it, there's no impact to it.
I mean, that's fair, and I can see where it doesn't bother me personally
Mm,
because from the moment that Leatherface sledgehammers Kirk, it really, outside of the brief scene with Sally and Franklin, where they're at the van and arguing over whether to go, it really doesn't slow down. We get Kirk gets sledgehammered, Pam gets grabbed, Jerry goes after them and investigates the house and gets taken out. We get that really brief lull. Face shows up, chainsaws Franklin, which I think is fairly effective, and you do see a decent amount of not coming off of Franklin, but a decent amount of blood spray there. And then we get into the chase sequence, which is pretty much the entire third act, and just put Sally through it.
Hmm.
Like that is nightmare sequence as far for that poor character.
yeah. So I think for my part, it's like the implication of horror wasn't strong enough to counteract the tamping down that they wanted to do for censorship purposes.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's just my my humble opinion.
No, that is totally valid. So another thing that I find really interesting about Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the look and feel of this movie. And I would argue that this is probably a good reason why it's banned is the way that it's depicted. I think that this is a movie that feels grosser than it is because of the way that it's shot. It is a sweaty, grimy, dirty film. I feel watching this like I did when I would like go to vacation out to Eastern Oregon, where it is this very kind of hot, sweaty summer kind of situation. And I think that contributes to a lot of, and obviously, inside the house is very Ed Gein in terms of the furniture that is made out of people and the room that is just feathers and bird remains. It's just kind of a, I don't even think sleazy is the right word because I don't think it's a particularly sleazy film, but it is a sweaty film, I guess would just kind of be the best way to describe it. Al, how do you feel about sort of how the movie looks, how it's shot? How do you think that influences it for you?
There are a lot of scenes that could easily have been cut in half, in quarters, and still convey the same sense without losing too much. It's like
Hmm.
it felt like a lot of it dragged on unnecessarily. Obviously, being a product of the time, it's like, well, clearly the picture quality isn't as up to standard. It is not in the highest of definition. But I think even like looking into it, they didn't even have like top level cameras for the time or even for the budget. Like
Right.
the equipment that they got, they could have gotten better stuff for the same price, kind of deal. So there is a lot of, from this more modern perspective, a lot of imbalances with the lighting and like just the general like the camera work that leaves some to be desired.
Okay.
It almost has the feel like in 10 years' time it would have been found footage.
I mean, yes, very much so. And, well, probably more like 25. But I know that found footage, as we previously covered, is not one of your favorites.
Mm. But that's the vibe it sort of gives me. Is like in some not too distant future, if this was to be written, it would have been a found footage film rather than uh, the way it was. Because it's not
Probably.
not like a documentary, but like it's got that sort of weird visual effects to it.
I would actually disagree with you on that. I think it does have sort of a documentary like feel to it.
In terms of like
Not
the visual, yes, but not like the trappings and the framing.
No, no, it's clearly it's shot in it's shot as a narrative film.
Yeah.
But yes, in terms of the visuals and in terms of the scenes going on a little bit longer than they would, which let's be honest is probably because they were trying to get to 78 minutes of screen time, so it counts as a feature film.
Hmm.
But I do think that those do give it that sort of documentary feel, which does add to the realness to me for me a little bit. But I can absolutely see also where that is a little off-putting. Holly, what do you think? How does the way that this is shot and edited and visuals and light, how does that work for you?
So I do agree some with Elle. For the first couple minutes, I thought this was going to be a found footage film
Mm-hmm.
because again, I didn't know what to expect when I went into
Right.
it. So yeah, I definitely thought until it picked up a little bit, and there are some scenes that I agree with Elle. I think they lingered a little too long on certain things,
Mm.
but at the same time, I think the feel of it is perfect for this sort of film. It sets the mood very well. It looks hot, dirty, gritty. It's the perfect look for a horror film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, I can absolutely see. I would say probably for me the worst offender in terms of the scene going along is the nighttime scene at the van between Franklin and Sally.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, how many times do we need Franklin to say stay? Let's just stay here, and Sally say let's go.
I think she says like, oh, what's that guy's name? Jerry or whatever.
Jerry,
And she's like,
yes.
no, I'm not leaving without Jerry. I'm not leaving, like over and over. And my thought there is like, well, screw Pam and Kirk. Okay. Because her only concern is Jerry.
Yep.
The others can be dead. I don't care.
Well, I mean, probably in her defense, I don't think the other two are getting frisky with her, so they're less important.
That is legitimately fair. No, I do think there are scenes that go on too long. I think some of them are really effective in that way. Like I said, it gives it that more of that documentary feel. Again, not narrative, but the
Hmm.
feel behind it, which does make it a little bit more effective for me. It's something that makes it stand out from the films that would follow it. Halloween, Friday the 13th, Black Christmas didn't follow it, released at the same time, but those films you are never going to mistake for, like, is this real or not? To the point that people legitimately thought that this movie was based on a true story and something that actually happened, which I don't know. I mean, we would see in smaller elements again, but we wouldn't see in that same way, I think, until Blair Witch Project.
Hmm.
Because I can say, yeah, me growing up, I'm pretty sure at some point somebody probably told me Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a real story. Which, to be fair, it is inspired by a real story. In the same way that, like, The Strangers is based on a real story. Let's just say heavily loosely inspired.
Right.
So moving from that into, I think, what is the scene that most people remember and talk about, which is very much the look and feel. This film is I think is a lot based on this scene, the dinner scene. Like it's
Yes.
arguably the most famous scene in this movie. It is, I would argue that it's one of the most brutal scenes in mainstream American horror. Not in terms of gore, not in terms of not in terms of gore or explicit violence or anything like that, but just the way what Sally is put through in this scene is this is a nightmare
Right.
to me. This is like an American, like full on absolute nightmare just put into cinematic form. The way the hitchhiker and the old man just repeatedly poke and threaten her. And it's not like they're stabbing her repeatedly or anything like that. This again I think is one of those scenes that Mandela effect comes in because you think about this scene, and I think the reputation that this scene has is like there are body parts on the table and it is this gross, violent, incredibly explicit scene. It's none of that, but it feels like that. Like the cutting of the finger and feeding grandpa is pure
Yes.
as far as I'm concerned.
Oh no, that made me like full body cringe.
Right? Elle, I think I'm curious to hear your take on because I think it is fair to say at this point you probably think a little bit less of this film than we do.
So I think it's interesting because I think even like I finished rewatching it basically 10 minutes before we collected to record this. Because other than that, the first time I watched it was as God intended, mute in portrait mode on my phone in a hospital with subtitles. So the perfect way to watch this movie, I guess. Uh, but I think it's weird because of my experiences. Like as I said, I had people that were like the family just in my everyday life.
Right.
And my mother, before retiring, was a recreational activities nurse. So I spent a lot of my childhood around like old people who were kind of infirm and mentally not all there.
Mm-hmm.
So even it's like, oh yeah, the grandpa sucking on the blood in the finger. It's like, yeah, no, I know like three guys who did that. Like, yeah, that's just how they would act. And as long as you got out of their way for dinner time at 3 p.m., you'd be fine.
I mean, okay, fair, but would you want to be tied down on a chair whose armrest was human arms while you were forced to have dinner with them?
I'm not saying it was human skin, but the
Okay.
leather, like the vinyl finishing they used, might as well have been.
Okay.
But other than that, as basically that is what it felt like. Like these types of having to wait after school for my mum to finish work. It's like, yeah, you just get the the terrible smell of this mass produced meal that everyone's eating, and it's mostly pureed vegetables or whatever. So it's just the undescribable stench. And of course, old people smell great.
Right.
And you aren't allowed to move from the spot because otherwise you get mum in trouble because you're not really meant to be there.
Uh-huh.
So you got to be quiet, you got to sit still, you got to stay in your spot while old people are existing around you and making you uncomfortable because you get confronted with age and mental illness. So it's like, yeah, no, this was not out of the realm of possibility for me.
I'm seriously concerned about your childhood.
Right.
Look, same.
I mean, fair enough.
I think the only difference is the nursing home had better lighting.
I mean, it does kind of sound like you might have been filming this scene because smelling like I
Yeah.
think that's one of the more infamous stories about this. I referenced it earlier. This was I think you see anything about this about the making of behind this film, they talk about this scene. took 27 hours to film. The formaldehyde that they used to preserve the food wore off very quickly. And then you had formaldehyde smell and rotting meat smell.
which I'm sure smelled great.
You know, you've just reminded me of a very core memory.
Uh
Oh
oh.
God.
Along with that, uh, the makeshift morgue that the nursing home had was next to the drink machine and the laundry. So
Oh no.
if you wanted to go out and get a can of Coke, you suddenly had the lovely heated smell of the morgue from the laundry fumes
Oh
blowing in
Jesus
your direction.
Christ.
So yeah, that's what I mean. It's
Well,
like this doesn't feel too out of my normal lived experience.
I mean, okay.
I did not expect this reaction.
I did say in the previous episode, I fully understand I might be a little bit psychopathic.
No, Ed, listen, it's fine. I find it interesting that it feels I can correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of your issues with Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, yeah, this is a little too relatable.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't really do anything novel or interesting. I've
Yeah,
lived it.
like yeah, I mean, that's kind of a fair point.
Sorry to get weird about it, but it's
No,
like
I'm really
you do
concerned
want these
about you.
perspectives. Look, aren't we all?
Like, look, you are where you are now, so I mean, I think you came through it. You made
Eventually.
it through. Let's put it that way. But I guess I'm more intrigued than anything else, which probably says something about me.
I imagine had I not lived that experience, I might be slightly perturbed by this scene.
That is fair. No, that is
Correct.
absolutely fair. And then just, I know the dinner scene ends and it transitions from there into the ending scene. To me, the ending sequence is still part of the dinner scene to me.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's all one.
Yeah, which I will say has one of the best moments of comedy in the film when the hitchhiker just gets flat run the fuck over.
Yeah, I was actually laughing a lot towards the end of the film.
Well, you kind of have to laugh though, because if you don't laugh, you're just like trying to crawl out of your seat.
Also, so I am completely convinced. I know that cannibalism is like, some people say it's implied. I say it's straight up cannibalism.
Oh,
Um,
it's straight up cannibalism. They say we're in meat. Like,
yeah, but some people say it's implied, but I'm like, no, no. I am fully convinced that during that dinner scene, they're trying to feed her Franklin.
oh, 100%.
Like
If not Franklin, then at least
maybe Jerry.
Pam, Kirk, and Jerry. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I don't know. I think meat takes longer to prepare. It's like for Thanksgiving, when do you get the turkey out?
I mean, they might not
Legitimate
be
question. I
too
don't celebrate
concerned.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah. They might not be too concerned about how prepared it is.
Yeah, and in complete fairness, we don't know how long Sally was out.
Yes.
Like, they could have kept her unconscious for, I think it's implied that it's still the same night, but could have been longer. We don't know. But that actually is a fair point. It could have been stores of what they had saved.
Hmm.
It's not like they didn't have a cache of spare cars to hint that it might have happened before.
Oh, it's 100% happened before. Poor Leatherface is like, why do all these people keep breaking into my house?
I'm so tired.
So, in defense of the family,
Mm-hmm.
they did try to
Yes.
warn them.
They did.
Like, that was a legitimate warning when they first pulled up to the gas station. And
Yep.
maybe I just watched too many horror films and I'm a paranoid person. If I had heard that, I would have gone. If I,
100%.
because they were like, no, you don't want to go there. The girls don't want to go there. I would have been like, you are probably right. I'm gonna go.
I mean,
I
I think it's plausible. Sorry, go ahead, El.
No, I was just gonna say that I think when he said that originally, and then they were like, "No, it's Dad's place." You did hear that shift of tone, going, "Oh, okay, well that's all right," but just still keep it in mind.
Yes, I think the script makes it plausible enough that it's not like what, frankly, a lot of films that would follow and imitate the slasher format would do, which is they're literally just dismissing the concerns and going off into a clearly dangerous situation. I think it makes it plausible in the fact that, yeah, no, it's fine. That's my grandfather's old place. And in fairness, that's not where they die. Like they only die and get in trouble because they went on to another property, not
Yeah.
necessarily realizing that that was the case until later. But yeah, I would be like, we're horror savvy. So we see the person warning us at the gas station, and we're like, nope, I have seen Cabin in the Woods. I'm going to keep driving.
Hmm.
Uh, now, I will say, going back to sort of the ending sequence, this is, we'll get into final thoughts in a minute, but while I would not call Texas Chainsaw Massacre my favorite horror movie, this is legitimately one of my favorite, like, final shot. Like, the notion of, in that last scene, this is not a film like Halloween or the Scream films where it's a sort of cathartic ending and you're like, okay, well, maybe with enough therapy, they're going to be okay. Sally is not going to be okay.
Oh no, no.
There is no coming back for that girl at that point. The way that Marilyn Burns is playing that, she is she is broken and probably irrevocably broken.
Hmm.
It makes me wonder, like, if that was done today, like this film just released exactly as it is. Firstly, you'd have the copyright lawyers onto you for ripping off an existing film, but
Right.
would then someone try to make a sequel where she does it to someone else because they broke her in that same way?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
That's a good question. I will say we do not see in the original four films or the three films that followed. We don't see that character again. We do see her show up in the Netflix produced requel that released a couple of years ago. And that's not the direction that they go in. She is, I don't know if I think Holly, you might have, I don't know, Elle, if you guys have seen the 2018 Halloween.
Nope.
I may have. Hold on. Let me see which one it is.
It's Jamie Lee Curtis's return.
Okay, when you say her return, because I have seen Halloween H2O.
Okay, it ignores all of the previous films that came before and does the Michael got recaptured and put back in an asylum and so on, and he breaks out.
I have seen one of the recent ones, and I'm trying to figure out if it's this.
Got it. That characterization of Lori is sort of the characterization that they give to Sally in the Netflix film. It doesn't work as well. That's a whole nother review and potentially a whole nother episode down the line. Elle, I think you might actually like that one a little bit better. I'm not sure. But
Hmm.
that is the only time I think that we've seen Sally since. And it is what it is. But yeah, obviously after this, we end up getting the three sequels that followed it, which take very different tones. Two is much more comedic and a lot more explicit. Three I haven't seen. Four is the weird one with Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, and there's a whole bit about a globalist New World Order type conspiracy. It's weird.
Okay, I'm so surprised by that cast.
It's so that film, this was before McConaughey or Zellweger were famous. They shot this movie, I want to say it's like 94. They both
Oh,
became famous soon after that. And the claim is that one or both of them tried to get the movie, keep the movie from being released. It's real bad. But I say real bad, but it's also a lot of fun because I think it knows it's bad and it just goes so bonkers out there. There is some problematic aspects around Leatherface, and it plays a lot more with gender role stuff with Leatherface, and I don't think it does it well.
Oh, this has gotten horrible reviews.
Yeah,
Oh,
but I kind of appreciate that its awfulness and the charm in that. Anyways, so moving on from like the film itself really quick into sort of its legacy, I guess, in pop culture. Are there any particular references or connections or legacy that it has that stand out as favorites to you guys? Elle?
I'm just trying to remember exactly which cartoon it is, but it's one of those ones like Family Guy or what have you,
Mm-hmm.
where they're having like the serial killer meeting group, like AA, and
Mm-hmm.
so you see like all the famous ones, and then of course Leatherface is amongst them, and
Right.
yeah, just not having any of that context. It's like, oh well, I know Freddy, I know Jason, I know Pinhead. Don't know what the weird looking one there is, Leatherface. Like I know that now. And no, actually, in the one that stands out most is in The Simpsons, the Treehouse of Horror, where they're doing the Shining parody,
Yep. The Shinin.
the Shinning. Yeah, Homer's in the freezer, like in the fridge, drinking the beers. So all the monsters come in and like open the door and drag him out. And yeah, pretty sure Leatherface is in that crowd as well.
Yep.
Again, just listing off all the like the classic slasher monsters.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you could do probably an entire episode or two just talking about all the different places. 'Cause it's like Nightmare on Elm Street. It's like Friday the 13th. There are arguably three iconic slashers, and then B plus tiers beyond those, and I'd say those are Jason, Freddy, and Leatherface. So in terms of those, yeah, those references, I feel like it's been referenced in like it. If there's a television show, it's probably referenced it in some way. If there's anything that's touched on horror, spoofs, anything like that, it's probably referenced it in some way.
Well, because it has that kind of legacy as that like the progenitor of the slasher.
Yep, very much so. And that's an area where I think it has surpassed Black Christmas because I think most people know Texas Chainsaw better than they do Black Christmas. Part of that is because the title, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, is very evocative. You know exactly what you're getting into, or you have an idea of what you're getting into with it.
I have to confess, during the movie, all I could really picture instead of Leatherface a lot of the time was Terry Funk as Chainsaw Charlie.
I was gonna say for wrestling fans, I could think of two. First, Terry Funk is Chainsaw Charlie in WWE because that wasn't unintentional. That wasn't coincidental. He's a man who is particularly known for being from Texas, wearing not butcher gear, but he was notably paired up with Mankind and wielding a chainsaw. There was also Corporal Kirshner from WWE, competed in Japan literally under the name and gimmick of Leatherface.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't last long because he screwed that up. But
Yeah.
for me personally, again, I could go off on all the films that this is inspired. Rob Zombie's Firefly trilogy, I think is the clearest riff on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I have complicated thoughts about the first one, but Devil's Rejects I think is an amazing but brutal film. I will just list my personal favorite reference, like just pop culture reference. And it's not from a horror film. It's not from anything like that. It is The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which anybody who hasn't seen that absolutely needs to see it. It is an Australian film about three drag queens making their way across the country, or at least across a certain swath of the country, to perform at a particular night in the road trip that they go on. And it stars Hugo Weaving, Guy Pearce, and Terrence Stamp. And there is a scene in it in which Guy Pearce's character, who is sort of the more in your face, he's the younger, brasher one of the three, walks into a video store in this sort of rural, like a little bit less urban place than they're used to living at. Walks in and asks if they have the Texas Chainsaw Mascara. It's a silly reference, but it made me laugh every single time. Holly, what about you? Are there any particular what are the pop culture references or films that most stand out to you?
So I really don't know. I can't, and I mean, maybe this is because it was my first time watching it and I really didn't know that much about it, but I can't really think of any.
You did mention one already, Dead by Daylight.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Yeah, because it's like, do meat hooks come up in as many other series?
Yeah, no legit, and literally Leatherface is in the game.
Well, yeah, but it's like also that is one of the game's core mechanics. So rather than direct references, that's a little bit more of an oblique one.
Oh yeah, that's Texas Chainsaw. Like, there's no way it's not.
I mean, during Pam's death, it did feel like I had just stepped into the game. You know, the overly cartoony reaction when he picks her up, the putting her on the meat
Yep,
hook. Yeah.
it's the oh shit. Let me wait for the survivor to come and rescue me. Oh wait,
Yes.
that's not happening.
Yeah, did you get that sort of Tetris effect where like you could see the UI for a sec?
Yes.
It's like it's that close enough to the actual game where it's just like a, oh yeah, wait.
Yep. So yeah, I think again we could talk for another couple hours just about the references. There's one more actually I would throw out because it's one that we all know and I think we can all appreciate, which is the opening scene of Scream is very much specifically the point where Ghostface is chasing down Casey outside,
Yeah.
the slow motion running up on her, that feels directly inspired by the chase scene in Texas Chainsaw.
Hmm.
And I would not be shocked if I mean, considering how much that film and obviously Wes Craven is referencing other horror films, I would not even be remotely shocked if that was intentional.
Oh, it probably was. They had a list
Yeah,
of
it makes
films they
sense.
were referencing.
Yeah. So, all right, final thoughts on this film. What do you think overall of the film? Holly,
Okay. So I am thinking I would put it at probably a 3.
okay,
I think it's pretty solid. There's definitely room for improvement. And I mean, there could be a little more gore, but again, I feel like there doesn't need to be. And you could give a little bit more backstory to probably Sally, I would say.
mm-hmm,
Again, the others really don't matter that much beyond Franklin.
right. That absolutely fair. Elle, how about you?
Yeah, it's hard because, as I said, I'm coming at it from this more modern sensibility
Right.
and not as much experience in the genre, so I might be judging it too harshly. But it's also, this is what it's resonating with me for.
Absolutely.
Is I would give it, yeah, two people in a freezer out of five.
Fair enough. No, that is absolutely fair. I am I do like it. I think obviously more than Elle. I think it's probably about a 4 out of 5 for me. 4 stars for chainsaws. Call it what you want. Um,
For people on meat hooks.
for people on meat hooks. For dead teenagers, because I think there are four dead teenagers
And Franklin.
out of 5. But I think in terms of what it's able to accomplish, I mean, outside of its historical significance, because that doesn't necessarily make a film great, what it's able to accomplish, considering its time and its what Hooper was working with, I do think, while it is a very grimy and dirty movie, as we always talk about, I do think there are some gorgeous shots in it. The sunset. I think the opening, not the scroll, although the scroll is an inspired choice. The opening shot of the hitchhiker's handiwork in the graveyard is particularly striking. I do think Sally is actually a very good final girl. The family is well portrayed, and I think there's a lot in there in terms of what Hooper was trying to say with the film. So I think it's probably about a 4 out of a 5 for me. It's not perfect. It is by no means perfect. It's not a perfect slasher film, but I did really enjoy it on the whole, and I did enjoy revisiting it too. That should pretty much finish us up for this week's episode. Next week we started with an absolute classic of the genre that's 50 years old, and next episode we are covering something that is much newer, as in it was released just last year in I Saw the TV Glow. But yeah, that is us for the Final Goals of Horror this week. You can find us at whatever podcatcher you prefer. We are on Blue Sky and Instagram at Final Ghouls Pod. Meanwhile, you can catch me at JThomas411Mania on Blue Sky and Letterbox.
I can be found on Mastodon at shards@kind.social and Shards System on Letterboxd.
You can find me at Holly Culp on Blue Sky or Miniature Magic 18 on Instagram.
And you can also find all of us playing role playing games at Final Show Films on Twitch and YouTube.
And for today's horror movie survival tip, if you're a virgin, stay that way. Honestly, it's better just all around.